kiss and hug me. Come on, strong, go on and love me. Let's not waste that big old moon. Wake up and smell the perfume. Just say, if you want to be more than friends, got some love I'd like to make.
Welcome to another Marketing Momentum with Charles and Deborah. Charles and I were just talking about...
That means then that to get people ready, right, in this particular thing, to get people ready, it takes a lot. It takes a lot to get people ready, and it's kind of almost like, you could kind of be like, well, why aren't you getting this, right? Why haven't you done anything? I mean, it's so
goodness.
easy. Right? Yeah.
I have to really, really stop and think that through, because as my husband says, my CPU in my brain has a really high clock speed. So I'm constantly reminding myself, and that doesn't mean that I'm better or anything like that. That I think causes sometimes a social disconnect. It's like, goodness, why are you talking so fast? And how you process what? And what kind of math problem? And then you feel like that kind of loneliness, like, doesn't anyone else think like I do? Or,
Right.
So it's a constant slowing down. And it's not slowing down to say, oh, somebody's slow. It's just, it's a slower clock speed. And I think maybe absorb more. I mean, there's benefits to both. But it's a challenge when, and like you said, as far as being able to do this without checklists. And I think the norm is probably to have checklists. And by the way, I have checklists doing the Hangouts, but I'm really weird in another area. Besides not having stage fright, I don't welcome things to go wrong, but I get a real rush out of fixing things when they do. So if you go on stage and all of a sudden one of the amps just fries, I'm like on it. Let's fix it. That show must go on. And I feel more of a high afterwards that we fixed something almost than the show itself. So I don't think most people are wired that way either.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we used to work at the boarding school, and I can't say that I can take credit for. It was interesting because we got there in '96, and there was a certain way that you ran a home with 12 teenagers. There were things that you were supposed to do, and one of the things that did not make sense to me when I got there was the fact that it seems like all the arguments between house parents and the teenagers were, why are you not where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there, right? And so what would happen was there'd be an argument about what was actually said about where that was. It was kind of like, well, you didn't tell me I had to be right here at 4:45. You said I had to be here at 4:30, and I was here at 4:32, but then I had to go back, and it was always this kind of like, what are you talking about? Right, and there'd be all these arguments about, at least in my estimation, something that was kind of silly. So, I said to my wife, I said, well, look, we could approach this a couple of different ways. We could get in an argument with these kids. I said, but I'm not going to argue about that stuff because it kind of obscures the real issue. So, for me, the best thing for me to do was to put up on a whiteboard a schedule, right? So, in other words, when they walk by in the morning, here's the schedule on the whiteboard. So there's no question, here's where you're supposed to be, and here is what you're supposed to do at that time. So if you're not doing that, whatever the consequences are, it's not, I can be dispassionate about it. It's not an emotional thing. It's not me versus you. It's not, I disliked you 10 years ago. It's, this says this, this is where you're supposed, this is where this thing says, right? Yes, it does. Okay, well, you're not there, are you? And you're not doing this. No, I wasn't. Okay, well, then the consequence is appropriate. And I think kind of like, in the same way, you kind of have to erect, these structures, right? And if you don't, and it's hard. I think it's hard to put those structures in place for oneself, but those are the things that are kind of, as you said, processing in the background to kind of get people those guardrails so that they don't just distract themselves to death, right? So those of us who do what we do, those checklists those schedules, those, I think, it's almost like we do not anticipate that they mean as much as they do, because most of us, and all of us, have this, I think, in some area of our life. We don't know what we're supposed to be doing when we're supposed to be doing it, right? And so so there's so much going on that we want to be able to pick up this one thing and say, okay, at this time, because again, you've got all this noise going on, the kids, you've got some customer that's calling you, you've got this thing, this email, but then that if I follow this thing, that at the end of this will be done. I'll get this done, and I'll have a deliverable finish. And I think that is important, today, because as we were talking about, the whole cheat sheet and the checklist thing, it's almost like it's hard to process when you're the one putting it together, right? But I saw this when I did the local podcast product, and a guy had interviewed me on his show, right? And so I put together like the emails that you send before the podcast, before and after, right? And almost modeling it after your whole green room concept. Well, when I got my email, right, inviting me to his show, and he did it like verbatim, and he was just saying, he said, Charles, this is what I would have never been able to do this if this thing had not been here, right? I would have been anguishing about getting you on here and what to say to you and how to get you on. But he said, we just follow this thing, and it worked, and it did. So, I'm kind of coming to appreciate those checklists and schedules, because you have kind of reminded me of that. But then it harkens me back to those days where I put that schedule on the board, and it eliminated that part of and that's really, honestly, we had a lot of success as house parents, not because we were great. I can almost attribute it to that one thing. That schedule.
You know what? I can relate to that.
We didn't argue with the kids.
We have a whiteboard in our studio, and it's something that reminds me I should add to the checklist as at least an optional. And I put, even though it's on my calendar, it's on Google Plus. Like I'm having a live event. It's everywhere else. I actually have a simple whiteboard where I put exactly what it is. Is it a video chat? Is it an audio chat? Whatever, for the studio. And that way, as far as scheduling, there's no confusion. There's no arguing. It's not like, well, you told me it was at this time. Oh, that was when it was supposed to go live. It's all right there.
Right.
And everybody can see it. And that has just eased things up. Rather than logging into my calendar, I just look at the whiteboard and go, oh, wow, I forgot about that. I need to be there at this time. And so helpful.
No, you think it's the opposite, that it's a little too rigid, and that's what we got. We got a lot of that at the boarding school. That, well, you can't train, you can't deal with kids like that. That's not like a house. It's not like a home. And I'm saying, so what we're supposed to do is just argue with these kids all day. Is that what we're supposed to do?
That sounds real beneficial.
Right.
I think kids want rules. I think people want rules. And I might actually clip this part out as a bonus episode of Marketing Momentum, because it's, I think I told you, my graduate work is in psychology. And I'll spare you the whole long detail, because basically I didn't agree with most of my classmates. Now, hopefully they aren't watching this, but anyway. But there was the case scenario is this gal that's got some issues. She, like, her boyfriend just broke up with her, whatever. The case study, she goes to a group therapy type session, and the gal, and her name was Mrs. Washington, lets her talk, and she's talking, and it seems like the whole group is like, oh, hey, we're listening to her describe her problems, and so like the whole session is about this new girl, Karen, telling about her problems. Now, we're supposed to apply all these different theories. I'll spare you all the psychobabble as far as all the different theories. And you've probably taken this in your graduate work as far as you My thing was, you know what, you still need to have rules. And what I said is, for the group therapy, maybe the first time someone comes in, maybe just say to the group, unless there's anything else pressing, that person gets like the whole session to talk about themselves. Maybe that's the rule, is that everybody gets like a free pass. But most of my classmates were saying, oh, this is so cool. It was so touchy-feely, and Karen is probably benefiting. I said, no, this is going to backfire because next week, Susan is going to have a breakup with her boyfriend, and she's going to want to talk, and she's going to think she can talk because Karen got to talk, but she doesn't get to because she's been there longer, and then George is going to get upset because you got two bickering. I mean, oh, my word. I'm looking at this going, this thing is going to backfire because there are no rules.
Right.
So I'm glad Karen felt good, but let's have some defined rules.
And man, I mean, how many times have we been in any group session where, it doesn't matter what the subject is. Now, this was a psychology session, but you could be, in a meeting, and it just could be John's day to talk about what happened with he and his wife, right? How many times have you been in a meeting, and it's just, he's just needed, and so everybody leaves not having accomplished anything, but they say, he just needed time to talk today. And I mean, and without, really some real hard ground rules, it's like you said, it just happens. So I think, I think part of, and I kind of, I'm glad we kind of got there. We think it is central to, what we do, enroll as consultants, information products. And I think, when we're telling people kind of at the outset, even if we sort of say, hey, you know what, before you get started with a video or before you get started reading anything, read this, or to some kind of way, put it at the beginning. So, you know what, here's what you have to do. If you're not going to do this, right, maybe just maybe just ask for your money back now. Because this will just spare us 29 days of, you kind of leaving it on your hard drive, you getting upset. Hey, this is what you need to be. This is what you need to do to be successful with this program. You can obviously keep it if you think you're going to be successful later in the line or you don't have time for it, but don't expect anything to happen unless you do these things. And those rules, I think, you call them checklists. I think they're critical, and I think we're undervaluing them in this era where we have so much information and we think we can get it all on the fly, right? We think we can kind of get on and kind of grab it, right? I don't have to know this. I'll just Google it and I'll get it. But who's got time for that, right? So
it's just a bunch of noise, and it's like you have to kind of capture it, a moving target. I think that was said on your, was it Dr. Keith talked about the moving target, and that's so true. And while you're trying to catch that moving target, you get distracted by this thing, whether it's on the internet or it's the dog barking or whatever it is, and you're off some other place, and you lose sight of where you're going. So yeah, that's where that structure, like you said, whether it's a checklist, whether it's rules, whatever it is, can kind of keep us on the right track.
Right. Yeah. And that apart from working for me, more I kind of feel like, by having my daughter work with me more than anything else, that is what I want her to get from work experience, which is I want her to be able to kind of structure her own, to figure out what are the rules, or what do I need to do in order to get the basic things done, and then to be able to write those things or sit them down, and then to be able to do them, consistent. Because that's because if she can do that, then she can go any place and do anything and start and be successful in whatever she does. It's like the people who, and I know there are people who are creative and they kind of float into things. There are always those people. They're just not the majority, right? The majority of us need like guardrails and slaps upside the head to kind of keep us in line.
Well, and even if I say I love things to like get stirred up a little bit and fix things, I still actually, if you see my life, it's like all in a calendar, and I have a FileMaker database that's a checklist, and I literally live by the checklist. It's almost like the kids have to make an appointment to be on the calendar. So you're absolutely right. As ad lib as I may feel like I am in personality, I'm a very rigid checklist follower. Confession.
Right. Well, I mean, long time ago when I was doing my MBA, it had to be back in 2003, right? And who knew? I mean, back then, I was required to do these interviews, and that's really kind of where I picked it up again. But the professor required us to interview these entrepreneurs in our local area, and I sat down with this guy. His name is Bill Alexander. he was like 70, 75. I don't even know if he's living. Multi-million gazillionaire, had built all this stuff in Harrisburg, and I said, okay, so you started out, back in, I don't know, 1902, but now here you are,
You
I
say
said,
1902? No?
well, my wife uses that terminology to just
okay.
talk about way back, 1902. But I said, so if you had to break down like one or two things that I said that would kind of guide you to where you are now. And he said, simple. He said, my friends didn't live by rules. I live by my rules, right? So he said, good or bad. I said, I have rules about when, how long I spend doing things. I have rules about how I go about my work. And he said, the people that didn't live by any rules at all, or didn't have the kind of rules that kind of guide them any place, so they didn't end up being as successful, as a real estate person. He said, and so that is what I attributed to. He said, yes, I was lucky. Yes, I worked hard. Yes, there were a lot of people who gave me opportunities. He said, but at the same time, though, he said, I'm ruthless about living by these things that I just do not deviate from, regardless. And so that was always illuminating me. It's always been in the back of my mind about just what it takes to get, to that level that I think everybody who's probably listening to this call wants to be at, ourselves included. It's like, we even talked about it a little bit last week. How much does it take to kind of get us off the path? Or, are we going to slow down are we going to start something and not finish it because it doesn't look like it's going to happen? Or are we going to stay the course, right, and kind of follow the pattern even that we set, right? Obviously, we course correct. Obviously, we do things to kind of make things different, but do we stay the course and do we follow our rules to make sure, we get, what it is we're looking for? So.
That's brilliant. I think if you can add that too, that rules does not mean that you subject other people to your rules. It's what works for you. And that's what it sounds like Mr. Alexander was saying. And, I was thinking about my recent stint with the last company as far as my particular view of ethics for me. I could not do what I felt by my interpretation was unethical. I'm not going to pass judgment on the company, whatever. That's for other people. That's for other entities. But I couldn't proceed forward doing what I felt was unethical.
Right. Yeah. But it's hard to live that way, though.
It is, because in that particular situation, by the world standards, they say, you fool. You could have had money. You could have had more riches. You could have had more, But the question is, and we mentioned this even the objective as far as a path, where are you going? What is most important? To me personally, my integrity, ethics, family, teaching my children good values is more important to me than any amount of money.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And all those things. And as is the case with, most entrepreneurs, the story is still being written. So, you sort of passed up all this stuff at this point. I mean, we don't know what that would eventually lead to, right? So, it could be in a book, somebody's writing about you later on to say, well, hey, here's this point at which, she could have scooped all this stuff up, right? But you passed it in order to do what she did, and then ended up, at this other point. So, I mean, everything's on a continuum all the time. But I think, I keep coming back to, these structures, right? And this has really kind of been something that I've been kind of processing a lot. Hey, and maybe I'm processing it more because I'm trying to figure out what am I going to teach my daughter right now, right? So how am I going to guide her best, if she's gonna be successful right here, in this gap year that she's doing between, now and college or whatever else. And I want to try to enforce those habits, even if they're uncomfortable to her, and even if they feels like I'm being more of a parent than maybe I have been in the past. I'm just saying, okay, well, no, you got to do this and you got to do it this way, not because I'm trying to be an ogre, but because I want her find her own pattern and to try to figure out which ones she can work them and to kind of do them, that way. So maybe that's why this whole thing is central to me now.
I think as parents, I think that really you're accountable for the information. I was thinking as you're saying that, so you're teaching children how to learn, and you're learning at the same time. And all this, I almost got teary-eyed thinking all ethics and all this stuff. But behind my son's bed, like at the headboard area, he's got this huge picture of Martin Luther King. And I think about that in all of our references to Martin Luther King. And everyone thinking, oh, what a great guy. And, and maybe some people are thinking, hey, if he were still alive, wouldn't he think that's great that he's so popular and people just love him? But you know what? I don't know Martin Luther King. Obviously, age-wise, I didn't have that blessing. But
right.
That's where I think the man knew his own rules, just like, quoting what you said about Bill Alexander. And I don't worship Martin Luther King, but his value of people, his God, and his value of people and loving people and ensuring that people were treated well, he lived by his rules. And he's an example that all of us could study what he represented, what he taught.
Yeah.
I'm tearing up. I'm sorry. I gotta stop.
No,
okay, I gotta stop talking about Martin Luther King or start.
It must have been a real, right? Yeah. So.
But an example of, again, you have to determine what your voice, what your path, whatever. But if that is great advice as far as sticking to that and teaching our children how to find that path and stick to that. And that doesn't mean it's over rigid. It means you do have a path. You do know where you're going and what represents you as a person and what you believe and what you stand for.
Again, yeah, and it's just hard to do with so many distractions and so many. And I mean, we could go on and on. I mean, about the instant, society. I'm not even trying to get into that whole thing. I'm just saying that there's just a lot of things that say, hey, you know what? You can do this. You need to do this. You need to do this now, right? In order to achieve this result. It's like so much, and it's not just it's not just marketing or information. It's just everything is kind of like, hey, do this right now. You can get the result right now. Do this now. And all those things, some of them work, some of them don't. But then after you do 90 of them, right, you end up missing what you could have gotten had you just kind of stayed true to stay married to the plan and the path. And and whatever your structures are, and in order to get, you know what I mean? Just try to kind of stand true instead of doing all these other little side things.
Do you think we had that as a society? Not that we were there like 50 years ago or anything. We're not that old. But
right.
Do you think we kind of had that before this instant society as far as online? Do you think we kind of had it a little bit like slower pace and we actually absorbed more of what was going on? Because now there's so much going on in so many different directions. I feel like we missed some of the basics.
I think so. I think some of it is society. I think some of it is generational though too. And I guess that's sort of saying the same thing. I mean, I think that we are a product of some of us are the product of baby boomers. Some of us are the products of what they call the silent generation. And I think
I'm sorry, I missed it. Which generation? I'm not up to speed. Silent generation.
I shouldn't even be using all that, but I think some of us are sort of in this age band, like they're around the boomers. We sort of were all kind of directed to kind of again be practical, right? It seems like the people that are, if I had to stereotype all of us, we're immensely practical in ways that I don't see in millennials. I don't see in boomers. We're just kind of like, let's just get this thing done. Let's just get the stuff done, and we'll just make it right. And so, I think because of that, we try to make sense out of everything, right? So we don't stop to question the fact that there are 10,000 things going on. We just try to make sense out of it. And so some things aren't supposed to be made sense out of. And so I think, some of that stuff, with all the stuff's coming at you, you know, you feel guilty by ignoring some of it, or you feel stupid, or you feel like, well, you can't ignore that, you know, otherwise you're going to be dumb. Well, I
can't fit it all in my
you can't fit it all in your head, and so we just continue to try to stick it all in the space and try to bring it all in. Okay, well, let me figure out how this fits in, and some of it doesn't. A lot of it doesn't, and so, you know, we just have to be able, I think, you know, just kind of, again, get all the stuff off that's going to keep us from, you know, the thing that's going to, like the path, right? The thing, our rules and the stuff that we need to be true to.
Excellent. Before we end this, do you want to talk about, maybe it's premature, so you can just tell me to zip it, but your idea as far as like the hand-holding or the coaching or like a local radio show or blog talk radio?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. You know, one of the things that I know that I know some people, much like, you know, Hangout Queen, they, you know, they sort of want to get things moving and want to get things going. And so, you know, what we're going to do is kind of make sure that, you know, we've got not just, you know, the product in place where people can read stuff, but hey, you know, most of the time it only really takes like maybe 5 or 10 minutes with somebody that'll kind of get you over the hump. And we're going to make sure that we make ourselves available. You know, as I said, you know, you give people yourself. And I think sometimes that's the difference between doing something and not doing something. I think, and so we don't want to say, well, you know, the reason, you know, you didn't do it is because you just don't want it bad enough. That's not it. Sometimes it's
that doesn't sound nice.
It's not cool, right? Yeah. And so, yeah, so we're gonna put our coaching together, and we're gonna make sure that people have access to it. And yeah, if you want to get a local radio show and get it, not a local radio show, but a blog talk radio show, a platform for yourself, if you're more like audio, then yeah, we're going to help people to do that. No, I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you.
Very cool. Sure thing. Well, if you're watching this video, if you click right there, you'll get the show notes. So there'll be links, there'll be bookmarks on the different topics that we covered, and there'll be links to the different resources that we mentioned. If you're listening to this on the podcast, you can go to socialwebcafe.tv and click on episodes. Any other plugs you want to before we end this session? I should say this session, this show.
Yeah, no. I think that's it. Yeah, we'll get back at it next week.
Sounds all right. Thanks, Charles. Thanks, viewers and listeners.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Don't you want to kiss and hug me? Come on, strong, go on and love me. Let's not waste that big old moon. Wake up and smell the perfume. Just say if you want to be more than friends. Got some love I'd like to make. Baby, you can squeeze me, I won't break. We could be in a paradise, you and me. Until then, I'll remind you again. Just say when. Oh yeah, until then, I'll remind you again. Just say when. Just say when.